think we're working. Yes, we're on. So, hello everybody. I'm on the line now with Dr. Eben Alexander from Virginia. I'm in London, or England, and we are recording a session for World Consciousness Day, which is to become Temples for Humanity Club of Budapest annual event. Hopefully will become a monthly event, and then will become just daily consciousness for everyone on the planet. That's the aim. But on the 11th of the 11th, which certainly in Europe and the UK has been War Memorial Day, we want to create a shift in attitude to creating peace and harmony, and how we can live as one global family on the planet and move beyond the paradigm of war. So I'm very excited to be here with Dr. Eben Alexander. He's author of the best-selling book, Proof of Heaven. Eben is a neuroscientist who had some extraordinary near-death experiences over a period of several days, even a week or a few weeks, and has gone through the shift from, I believe, super skeptic to ardent spiritualist and proponent of consciousness, and how the consciousness of heaven plays out in our daily lives. Is that right?
Yes, very much the case. I started all of this, with a 54-year life that was spent in that scientific materialism, and with all those years working as a neurosurgeon, teaching other neurosurgeons at Harvard Medical School for 15 years. And thinking I had some notion of brain, mind, consciousness, and how all of that made any kind of sense. And then, November 2008, was driven deep into coma over just a few hours with a severe gram-negative bacterial meningitis, which, according to all the principles of conventional neuroscience, should have disabled all but the most rudimentary forms of conscious awareness. And yet what actually happened to me deep in this coma, at a time when my doctors had full evidence from my neurologic exams and from CT and MRI scans and lab values that my neocortex was way too badly damaged to be supporting anything in the way of extraordinary consciousness. That's exactly what I experienced. And so coming back to this world, I had a tremendous challenge in trying to fit it into my worldview. And of course, in addition to that was this absolutely miraculous recovery that has no explanation in Western medicine. I mean, by 8 weeks after coma, I had recovered to the point that I was, my memories and my mental function were actually better than they had been before coma. And that was a very difficult thing to understand for someone who had previously bought into the conventional neuroscientific worldview that the brain creates consciousness. And so really what this is all about is not as much a discussion of what happens after we die. That's a small part of the discussion. The much bigger part of the discussion has to do with the very nature of reality and of consciousness itself. What is the relationship between consciousness and the physical brain and physical world? Because the thing that has made itself very, very clear to our ongoing scientific assessment of the brain-mind relationship is that the brain does not create consciousness out of physical matter. The evidence has been piling up for millennia. And so this is a very deep and kind of challenging kind of understanding of things that emerges from going back to square one and trying to come up with the nature of reality. It certainly involves a better addressing of what's known as the measurement paradox in quantum physics. And people often hear about the relationship of quantum physics to consciousness, but I think what people miss is that, in fact, as I would see it today, the effects of quantum mechanical experiments are really the confirmation that consciousness is fundamental in the universe, and that everything in the observable physical universe emerges out of consciousness. And it's really about the only reasonable position for a human being given the evidence of their own life and existence. And of course, part of that is also understanding that the out there, that we all experience is out there, all that world out there that I can see with my eyes and hear with my ears and sense with touch and taste and smell through my sensory modalities, that in fact, an objective external reality that we all like to picture as existing out there is not what is there behind it all. And that's where the quantum physics is so crucial. It is showing us that there's actually an information substrate, whether you want to call that the quantum hologram or you want to call it the Akashic records, but there's an information substrate on which all of possibilities are based. But the actualities that occur depend on that conscious mind and in the soul's journey. And that is what is so important to get. And it's a complete 180-degree flip from that materialist position that insanely tries to argue that the physical brain and the workings of subatomic particles and fields in the brain somehow create this illusion, as they would put it, of consciousness and an illusion of free will. And the materialists can say that very proudly because they believe the physical is all that exists. So, of course, they have to somehow explain consciousness emerging from the brain. But then, of course, you get into all of the scientific evidence for non-local consciousness. Things like telepathy, remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, shared death experiences, where people who are physiologically normal have identical kind of journeys, even to the point of witnessing a full-blown life review before coming back to this world. Also phenomena, say, of past life memories in children, indicative of reincarnation. The scientific group at University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, beginning with Ian Stevenson, then through the work currently of Jim Tucker, more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children where the most obvious explanation is of reincarnation. So these kind of examples of consciousness robustly present in the absence of physical brain, or where the brain cannot possibly explain the events that occur, that's what we're having to face up to. And of course,
that's a very interesting point, because as I mentioned to you when we met in the summer, I recently had some healing experiences of someone who kept dying, and I was communicating by SMS and online and WhatsApp with the doctors, and the doctors were telling me he's flatlined, he's gone, we're taking him to the morgue, we've written out the death certificate, and I was dowsing, and all I could pick up was that he is not dead. He is not dead. He's still there. The soul is still connected to the body. And he's coming back, and every time he came back, he's still here now. And this was 4 months ago. So I think it would be very interesting for you if you could describe to us your experience of consciousness when you were in that state of having the near-death experiences. Because to some people, consciousness, what does that mean?
Right. Well, I would first of all define that consciousness, the deep mystery when we talk about consciousness, and this is the deep mystery whether you're talking about what's called the hard problem of consciousness, which is the philosophical difficulty of trying to somehow explain all of mental workings from the physical actions within the brain. And that hard problem is actually very deep, probably the deepest conundrum ever known to human thought. And then likewise, the measurement paradox in quantum physics, which is the aspect of quantum physics that really shows us, screams at us, that consciousness is fundamental in the universe, that consciousness is what exists, and then paints the picture of all of emerging reality. Both of those, the hard problem of consciousness and the measurement paradox in quantum physics, are about the awareness. The awareness that we have of existing. That awareness is the deep mystery. So, of course, don't get lost thinking that the little voice in your head is consciousness. No. The little voice in the head is little more than a parlor trick. Consciousness is the awareness. And, of course, animals can have a very rich conscious awareness. For some reason, we tended to lead ourselves in the 20th century, into some people at least, into beliefs that animals weren't even conscious. And I think that might have been partially over some of that confusion around the linguistic brain, the voice of the ego in the head. Now, of course, that little voice is also the voice of logic and of rational thought. But the bottom line is the linguistic brain can trap us and lead us astray because it has essentially built in some presuppositions about the way the world works. So just to start out, consciousness is that awareness. And this is what we can all come to develop and cultivate to a much higher form in deep meditation. And it's one of the reasons why Karen Newell and I travel around the world trying to teach people different tools and techniques for getting in deep transcendental meditative states. So I think getting back to your question about consciousness and my personal experience, well, deep in that coma, important to point out that one of the unusual features of my near-death experience is that I was amnesic for the life of Eben Alexander. I had no words, no language, none of my religious beliefs, none of my personal memories of my life before coma, none of my scientific knowledge of brain-mind consciousness gleaned over 20 years in academic neurosurgery. None of that remained when I was awoke deep in the midst of coma. In fact, I had what I call an empty slate. I had no memories of Earth or of this universe. So it really was a perfect position to start from on a journey that was to completely revolutionize all of my thinking about everything I had ever come to accept about the nature of reality. And that amnesia is very important. Now, of course, in the early weeks and months after my coma, I thought that amnesia had a simple explanation. I thought, well, my doctors had already told me and shown me through lab results, neurologic exams, and my scans, how devastated my entire neocortex was. That was their argument that I couldn't have had any experience because my neocortex was so badly damaged. And conventional neuroscience thinks that neocortex, at least some part of it, must be working for any kind of detailed conscious awareness. And mine was really shut down. So at the very beginning, in the state of complete amnesia with not even any words or language remaining to me or memories of humans or life on Earth, it all started in an earthworm eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. And I have a strong memory of roots or blood vessels all around me. It was like being buried in dirty jello. And for a long time, I thought, well, that was probably the best consciousness my physical brain could muster while it was soaking in pus, being destroyed by E. coli. I now realize, after much of my reading and meditation, etc., know that that's a very real realm that many others have encountered. It's written about, for example, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But it's a realm that you don't have to fear at all when you realize that we are all truly divine, eternal, spiritual beings. You can pass right through it. But beliefs do help set the stage for how readily one can transcend these various levels. Now, that earthworm eye view, I promise you, I had no kind of memory moment to moment, so it seemed to be lasting forever. And I felt like I'd always existed there. It did give me a certain fearlessness, though, by having no memories at all and by having no kind of attachments to other souls or responsibilities. I was free. I was very free throughout this entire experience, and in fact, at many times during the experience, thought, well, this can all continue or it can all come to a crashing halt. It does not matter. And that did allow for being extremely fearless through this entire journey. Now, the good news is that earthworm eye view did not last forever. There came a slowly spinning, very clear white light with fine silvery and golden tendrils off of it, and came forth with a perfect musical melody, and it opened up like a rip in the fabric of that ugly earthworm eye view realm and led up into this ultra-real gateway valley that was absolutely lush and filled with beauty and growth. Never any hint of death or decay. And many months later, in writing it all up, I came to see it in many ways as kind of like Plato's world of forms that he talked about, the world of ideals. But this is a world of ideals that has everything to do with our soul and our bigger soul group journey with all the evolution of consciousness, as Teilhard de Chardin talked about it. And so in this Gateway Valley, lots of waterfalls and the crystal blue pools and lush life, plant life growing everywhere, lots of buds and flowers, blossoms blooming, rich textures, colors beyond the rainbow. I was a speck of awareness flying on a butterfly wing. That's how I perceived it. And this was one of millions of butterflies, all looping and spiraling in these vast formations, and emanating chants and hymns, anthems that would just thunder right through me with this power, majesty, awe, beauty of the infinite healing power of that unconditional love at the core and all through that realm, that beautiful deity. And beside me on the butterfly wing was that beautiful girl that I talk about in Proof of Heaven. And of course, 4 months after my coma, she presented an incredible opportunity for growth in the way that she demonstrated the reality of my journey to me. And that part was absolutely the turning point, the fulcrum for my then ascending towards a much greater wisdom and a much greater knowing through knowing the reality of the journey, and then realizing this is all about coming to see that consciousness is primordial in the universe. I mean, the Big Bang and everything in our observable universe is just a small little subsection contained within consciousness. And consciousness generates every bit of this. And our very conscious awareness as human beings is the spark of that divinity within. And now on this journey, that beautiful girl on the butterfly wing gave me profound messages that were very comforting at the time. And I share these because I think they are really the central message of Proof of Heaven. And they are for all souls. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You will be taken care of. And of course, how she told me at that time, and I put in the book, but I wish I'd explained a little more at the time, you can do no wrong. Because realizing this is soul school, that we're here given the gift of free will by that creative deity, that infinitely loving power. And that free will allows us to make choices that are either along the lines of that love, compassion, mercy, acceptance, and forgiveness, which is the truest and straightest pathway towards oneness with the divine, or we can choose otherwise. We can choose to lead a more egocentric life, one that's more selfish and greedy or careless, dishing out pain and suffering to others. We have the free will to make those choices. But if we deviate too far away from that more ideal line of the love, compassion, and mercy, then we're just choosing to take a more arduous pathway. And if we then go through all the difficulties of that in life without making appropriate amends to those that we've harmed in any way, and that begins with forgiving ourselves, but also involves making amends and forgiving others in our life journey, then we have to face up to it in a life review when we leave this world. And that's the reason I came to see there is no need for an eternal hell. In fact, eternal hell made 0 sense from my journey. And I also came back realizing that God, that deity, that I came to know not only in that gateway realm, but even more so ascending up into higher and higher levels, seeing all of 4-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of what I call deep time and that ordering and causality within the spiritual realm, all of that collapsing down until every bit of kind of the material world and lower spiritual realms has collapsed down into this incredibly complex oversphere. And I was in the core, in that realm of infinite and perfect oneness. And of course, that is something that you cannot possibly put into any kind of human words of definition. The best I can do is a very weak sounding kind of a metaphorical presentation. It was like being at the edge of the event horizon of a black hole, where there was this kind of oscillation between the pure absolute oneness, where all of eternity and infinity and everything throughout the universe was just that one wave and frequency, that one awe, that one perfect existence. And then right at the edges of that event horizon, where you could see how it would start to parcel out into all of the multiple layers going all the way out to this most superficial layer. And in many ways, this being the most dreamlike layer. And so then this oscillation through all those different levels, in that core realm, being told I wasn't there to stay, that I'd be going back, but would be taught many things. And then would tumble back down to that earthworm eye view. And by recalling the musical notes, the melody, that's what opened up that portal yet again. It would conjure up that beautiful, spinning, pure white light that would open like a portal up into the brilliant, ultra-real Gateway Valley, back on the wing of the butterfly, and all the souls dancing below, thousands of beings that I saw as between lives, dressed in very simple, in my writings I said peasant garb, but beautiful colors and lots of joy and merriment. All of that was being fueled because of those anthems that were streaming down from above and these powerful waves of joy and bliss and revelations of the infinite healing power of unconditional love. And yet those angelic choirs would yet again provide the portals up into that core realm. And in fact, cycling through many times through multiple lessons, I came to think that maybe the going back that they referred to is going back to the earthworm eye view. So I could think, well, that's not the biggest problem in the world, because I had learned that by conjuring up those musical notes in my memory, the perfect melody that had been associated with that spinning white light, it would come up yet again. So important lessons there were the crucial role of sound, vibration, frequency, and of course, when you're on the other side of the veil like that, information flow can be far more profound. That's why it's so difficult to describe. You no longer have the physical brain in the way, acting as a reducing valve or filter, limiting that primordial, infinite, universal consciousness. You get full bore consciousness, every bit about your soul's journey and soul group journey, and about, from my journey, it was very clear, because I had no more of those filters of putting all this in the perspective of earthly beings and earthly language and human thought, a far more robust kind of vision of it all, which we all get at that time. I was thinking I was gifted that because of the destruction of my neocortex. But in fact, all of us get liberated from the shackles of the physical brain when we leave our physical bodies. The other thing that was so crucial about the lessons I learned has to do with the fact that my Christian upbringing in a Methodist church in North Carolina, which of course talked about one incarnation, then eternal heaven or hell, made zero sense. The eternity of soul that I witnessed so profoundly and that was so proven to me by my journey also implies that we come back again and again and again, that our souls are always involved in this beautiful dance of ascendance, going towards that oneness with the divine through multiple incarnations. And what we learn in a given life, a lot of the knowledge can come back to us, although there's also kind of a programmed forgetting. When you get into the literature on past life memories in children, it's really striking how commonly people can access memories of a past life when they're talking with a child between ages about 2 and 6. But beyond age 5 or 6, those memories start to get covered over. It's very important. I would encourage anyone out there who has access to a child or grandchild down to that beautiful age range of 2 to 6, ask them where they were before this. And I think you can start to get some fascinating answers. But the more we come to realize that consciousness is a far deeper mystery than just this little epiphenomenon illusion that seems to appear out of the physical workings of the brain, because that's not at all what consciousness is.
No.
And consciousness, between the heart problem and the measurement paradox in quantum physics, not only does it allow that we are spiritual beings in a spiritual universe, it demands that we are spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. It puts consciousness right in the forefront of all of existence, which is where it naturally truly is, not as some little chaotic afterthought and accidental effect of chemical reactions in the physical brain. That's where our materialist science got it completely wrong. But the good news is they're now in the process of getting it right. The scientific books that I would encourage any of the deeply interested seekers out there who have a strong scientific leaning, the 2 books that I usually recommend to people, one is Irreducible Mind, Toward a Psychology for the 21st Century. It's a very dense scientific work, though. This is not for the faint of heart, but it's an excellent work. It's from the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, Ed Kelly, Bruce Grayson, Emily Williams Grayson, and others. Just brilliant workers from Esalen and from UVA. The other scientific book on these topics, more recent, from the same group, more or less, is more of the kind of theoretical underpinnings that would support the nature of this kind of new view of reality. That book came out in February 2015. It's called Beyond Physicalism, Toward a Reconciliation of Science and Spirituality. And the deep truth here is there's no way out for materialist science, especially those who struggle with a measurement paradox in quantum physics, unless they realize that consciousness is first and foremost primary in the universe and creates everything that emerges from it. In fact, I would say that ontological idealism is really the most stable and realistic philosophical position to take on all this, given the evidence that any one of us has. And it also opens doors to much more ready explanation of all this, which is why I think those two books, Irreducible Mind and Beyond Physicalism, are so crucial to this emerging worldview. Another book that I think really helps, it's a recent edition, and nowhere near as kind of dense as those first two books, although they are beautiful works. When I say dense, I don't want to scare people away, but they are not for the weaker-minded. They get deeply into why quantum physics is such a crucial aspect of understanding this. And although there are many physicists in the world today who fully get that until you have a far more robust understanding of the nature of consciousness and the interaction of kind of the ideal world with this physical world, those would be people like Sir Roger Penrose, British mathematical physicists, people like Henry Stapp, also a brilliant physicist, Brian Josephson, physics Nobel laureate, William Tiller, who's an engineer, Claude Swanson. There are a number of physicists, engineers, and scientists of very deep stripes who get where this is headed and realize the importance of consciousness. But, all this, the other interpretations, for example, one of the most popular interpretations of the measurement paradox in quantum physics among physicists is the many worlds interpretation of Hugh Everett. And I would say that's an amazing effort on the behalf of physicists to try and avoid anything that has to do with consciousness. But what they ask you to believe, the infinite parallel universes unfolding at every instant in space and time throughout all of infinity and eternity, to me, just smacks of insanity that you'd be going to those lengths just to avoid admitting that consciousness is fundamental in the universe. And so it really is more, from my point of view, to look at the interpretations that really allow for conscious manifestation in this world, and to realize that consciousness is first and foremost.
Well, and this is one of the challenges, isn't it? I worked with teaching and healing with a lot of people and past lives, and during the sessions they have tangible experiences, or I pick up from the Akashic records information that's very relevant to them, about places and people they have connections with that are fantastic or challenging, and it's so profoundly resonant and has no rational explanation in the context of this life. But what happens after the sessions, or after you've had a profound spiritual experience, which is such a palpable experience, isn't it? A feeling experience. It's not an intellectual knowing. But then when people go away, the challenge is to hold on to the trust of the validity and the authenticity of that experience, and to bring it more and more into everyday life.
Well, that's very much the case. And I would say that this is why Karen Newell and I have taken this tact of trying to take powerful meditative tools out there to this world. And that's why she's done a lot of work with Sacred Acoustics. She was a co-founder of Sacred Acoustics, and she and her business partner in Sacred Acoustics have created some extremely powerful tools using differential sound frequencies to help engender deep transcendental conscious states. And what we encourage people to do is to use these tools. If you already have a means of meditation, of going deep within consciousness, that's fine. Keep working with it, developing it. We encourage people to make it a daily practice. I'm surprised anyone would choose in this day and age not to meditate, given all the extremely powerful gifts that meditation brings into our lives, whether you're talking about creativity, insight, guidance, connecting with the souls of departed loved ones, all the benefits from health, improvements in the immune system. It's just amazing what going within and kind of harnessing the power of consciousness, when you realize we're all co-creating the emerging actualities, and we have great power to affect that. And that is why going within is so important. And so in answer to your the problem you put out there about people having these amazing personal experiences, but then coming back to this world, and especially in our culture, where so much of this is kind of looked at as, woo-woo and crazy imagination, in fact, maintaining that experience gave them better evidence about the nature of truth and reality than any of the kind of running commentary you might get from other people. That's why experience is so absolutely critical. None of us have ever really gained any kind of insight knowing about the nature of this life and of reality without personal experience. I mean, it's really all personal experience. And the personal experience is really stuff that we set up. I would say our higher soul and our soul groups are part of setting up all that personal experience. I mean, my journey showed me very clearly that the hardships and difficulties in life, and certainly as a physician, that includes illness and injury, that these are gifts. These are the energy points that drive our progress, and it's how we deal with those hardships. Are we able to recover the memory of the fact that we are divine, eternal, sacred, spiritual beings connected with all else and with that God, with that deity at the core? And the more we can recover the love and the power of that connection, and that we're never separate from it, the more we can gain the spiritual health that is so crucial for any kind of emerging physical, mental, and emotional health. In so many ways, it's really all about healing. When you think that healing and health are really about becoming complete, becoming all, becoming whole. That's what it's all about. And in fact, that's what this whole evolution of consciousness that Teilhard de Chardin spoke of in his writings in the mid-20th century, that's what I believe is happening. This is an awakening, an evolution of consciousness. And just like that old saying, all politics is local, well, likewise, all spirituality, in fact, the entire universe in many ways, is local. It's all within mind. And so it's how we can formulate a worldview within mind that allows for all this and opens widely enough to accept the much grander aspects of who we are. If I think that I am Eben Alexander and I am my thoughts and I am, this neurosurgeon who's had this experience in my existence is birth to death, I'm obviously not getting the much bigger picture of who I am. The who I am is much more of who we are. And we is not just humans on Earth, and it's not just all life on Earth. We is all of sentience throughout the universe, throughout all of eternity. Yeah. And we are all part of that. Now, anytime you separate out part of the universe from the rest of the universe, you are introducing distortions immediately in that context. And that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. In fact, I would say that's right at the heart of the problem with reductive materialism. That's a generic name for our conventional scientific understanding that the only stuff in the world is material, and that if you reduce it all down to the fundamental subatomic particles, understand the laws that govern the behavior of those particles, then you can understand the whole universe. From my point of view, that's completely backwards. That's a bottom-up approach that doesn't really work. Much better the top-down approach, the meditation, the going within, the seeing consciousness as universal, infinite, and throughout all of this universe, and taking that top-down approach to getting a much richer view of how it all works together. Because it's only by seeing the whole system that we can begin to glimpse how it all works. Now, many people out there would say, well, wait a minute, human beings don't have infinite bandwidth, and that's what you would need to fully grok the entire universe for all of infinity. But in fact, we can do much better than we do trying to logically work our way to it through the linguistic brain on this side of the veil. We can get much greater insight. And that's why going within is so important. And I recommend it to everyone. Certainly, there have been many scientists and inventors, artists, musicians. Examples would include Thomas Alva Edison and Albert Einstein, who used to float around in a sailboat looking up at the sky for hours on end before he would come up with his great insights. Salvador Dali, Ludwig von Beethoven, and others. They wrote about how their insights, their greatest creative flashes, came from the universe. Sometimes bidden, invited, sometimes completely out of the blue. But they realized they didn't kind of think their way and work their way logically to this. They had to go within, and the universe had to provide some additional kind of kindling and spark to help them get to the next level of understanding. And that's why meditation is so crucial in all of this.
Well, and of course, when we go within, what we access is the greater soul memory and the cellular memory, and it all exists in the cellular memory. And if we accept reincarnation as a fundamental tenet of life, which every ancient spiritual culture did, even Christianity until it was taken out of the Bible in the Nicene Council, then we have to realize that if we've had many other lives or experiences of incarnated consciousness, that knowing and the wisdom and the culminated learning from all of those lives is still available to us.
Right, exactly. And that's what we can access by going within. That's why it is so important. Personal experience is everything. And as much as, our conventional science tries to dismiss NDEs, saying, oh, well, that's one case, an anecdote, that doesn't count. Well, when you have millions of such anecdotes and they line up very reliably, then we need to pay big attention. Richard Feynman, a renowned quantum physicist in the mid-20th century, made it very clear, I would be paraphrasing him here, but he said something to the effect of, there is much truth that can never be proven or disproven through the scientific method. I would say that everything that I believe about the nature of reality is something that would be consistent with everything we can do within science. And that's why my current viewpoint is so refreshing, because it opens the door to far greater progress for science than when you stick yourself in the back left corner of your bedroom closet, just studying one little facet of physics or whatever and thinking that tells you all about the nature of all reality. No, that's why we need to open our minds. And in fact, I would say the truly open-minded skeptic, which is the most valuable asset in this whole discussion, the very first thing that the truly open-minded and knowledgeable skeptic does in that whole mind-body discussion is throw out the materialist position, that the physical brain is somehow creating consciousness out of physical matter, as the least applicable to all of the data at hand. That's why we need to move along that spectrum of the mind-body debate much closer. Dualism is obviously just a kind of a compromise position and is not going to be anything that's ultimate truth. Ultimate truth involves really opening our minds enough to approach it from that position of ontological idealism, which is the only thing the evidence really can support. And then we have to work on that intersection of consciousness and how it impacts on emerging actualities of reality. And all that is a fascinating question that does involve a lot of research into the mechanism of the brain. But always remember, you won't find all the answers within the brain, because consciousness and memory are not even actually occurring in the brain. They're occurring in that realm outside of four-dimensional space-time. But again, they're projecting all of this down into our conscious awareness and making it look like the external world is the reality. But it's just the opposite of that. Our consciousness, soul, and spirit is what actually exists, and is united with that one deity, and united with all sentient life throughout the universe. But this is all our journey of discovery, is to understand how all of that works. And often it's really at those ragged edges around the edges of scientific research, and especially in neuroscience, that show us that you cannot explain it all within the workings of the brain.
Well, how can we understand infinite consciousness unless we are God or the infinite source? It's what the Native Americans call the Great Mystery.
Right, the Great Spirit. And of course, we are all part of that. And much of this awakening about the true nature of consciousness involves realizing that the boundaries of self do not have the concrete reality that we think they do. That's why things like telepathy, people dreaming other people's dreams, things like that. Very mysterious phenomena are real. They're about that overlap. And for anyone who wants an excellent book on that whole topic, I would recommend Dr. Larry Dossey's The One Mind. It's an extremely good and powerful book about kind of emerging views and understanding of the nature of consciousness, and how really this is much more of one mind that is doing the evolving. And yet it presents as all these apparent different facets on the face of the diamond. But we're really all part of that one mind. And that's really a beautiful realization, especially as we come to realize the power that gives us, the awakening this world has to go through. But also that awakening involves the deep and profound emotional truth that love, compassion, forgiveness, and mercy are really at the core of the lessons that humanity has been challenged to learn for the last few thousand years. And it is high time we really learn those lessons deeply.
Well, that's really the point of this event that we're creating for the 11th of November. And so during your experiences, or since those, do you have a message for humanity? Because, of course, we live in a dimension in our 3D reality of duality. How we can create a great enough shift of consciousness to reach that fulcrum point and tip the planet away.
Well, I think the best message concerning all of that really is a message to each and every individual. Because again, this is it's never anything more than individual human minds trying to interpret the deeper truths of reality. And that message is very strongly that we are all interconnected. The fabric of the ultimate reality is pure, unconditional love. We can each serve as a conduit for that, as a vehicle for bringing that infinitely healing power of that love that has no conditions attached whatsoever into our lives. First and foremost, loving ourselves as the true, divine, eternal, godlike spiritual beings that we all truly are. But when we get mired down in the tiny little ego view of who we are, and the little struggling, kind of baby-wounded individual that gets so mired down in the fear and anxiety of the ego, we lose sight of all of that. So the best thing to remember for each and every human being is you're far more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Going within is a beautiful way of coming to realize that connectedness with the divine and with all other sentience, and realize that love is the coin of the realm. And we can bring that into our lives, and the best way to truly love ourselves as these eternal, divine, infinitely powerful spiritual beings is to serve as a conduit to allow that love to come in through us, and we can simply distribute it out to all of our fellow sentient beings in this journey. I don't think anyone doubts the reality of the fact that if we can get a certain, even small percentage, like 3 or 4% of people in this world into meditating, into focusing on the love and the connectedness and the oneness, that would be enough to shift the entire paradigm over. So it doesn't take all 7.3 billion people getting on board with this, but it just takes a certain small percentage of light beings to take up the challenge, recover the memories of divinity and infinite power of healing within us all, and this world will shift. We have it within our power. And from my point of view, this dramatic shift is really already in progress. And I would say over the next decade or two, we are going to make unprecedented progress in achieving what is our true human destiny. And that is a world that has far more in the way of peace, harmony, togetherness, and mutual support of all of us for all the others.
Aho to that, as the Native Americans say. I don't think we can follow that. There's anything more to say after that. That is the message, isn't it?
Well, it's very beautiful, and I think I'm very optimistic about where this world is headed. I know some people will hear you say that these days. If you look at the kind of carnival situation of the political race in the U.S., and they go, wait a minute, how is any of this part of the bigger plan? Well, I believe it all is. There's something known as the gift of desperation. People in in medicine, working with patients who are in dire straits, the people who work in alcoholism and addiction and recovery program, they know every bit about what that gift of desperation is.
Yes.
And I believe that this world has been given a beautiful gift of desperation that will energize and allow us to rise far higher than we've ever done before. And it's all along this pathway of discovery that really is just a uniting, a synthesis of some of the greatest wisdom out of Eastern and Western spiritual traditions, but also has a significant component with the leading edges of cosmology and quantum physics, those who research string theory, quantum gravity, even today, because that provides some fresh energy into the next level of understanding that we've never really had before in the same way. So I think that I am very optimistic about where this is headed, and from my point of view, the world is shifting dramatically and very rapidly.
Well, and you're getting to see plenty of that as you're traveling around doing.
Karen and I are very blessed with that, that's for sure. We get to meet a lot of wonderful spiritual, awakened and loving souls all around this world on our travels, and it's a real blessing for us.
Beautiful. Well, you're doing powerful and beautiful work, and the world needs it, and the world needs scientists and people from a medical background who can put it into a context that the left brain can begin to understand.
Right. Well, that's what we're trying to do. Get to that point. But the answers lie within us all. And that's why going within has such extreme power.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you very much, Eben. That was a wonderful talk.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for this opportunity. And we look forward to the links so we can see how it all turns out when you get the whole conference together.